Welcome to ESTI, PCIC, and ESC educational videos. Good day! I am Miss CJ Kazana, your subject teacher for the first semester to the Introduction to the Philosophy of the Human Person. For the first quarter, your foundational concept is to understand the meaning and process of doing philosophy of the human person as an embodied being in the world and in the environment as a means towards a holistic understanding of life. For lesson 1, it is all about pursuing wisdom and facing challenges in the 21st century. Let us proceed to the next slide.
Wave Beats Music.
Summary of the topics. Lesson 1. Pursuing Wisdom and Facing Challenges in the 21st Century. Introduction to Doing Philosophy. 1. The Meaning of Philosophy. 2. Recognize human activities that emanated from deliberate reflection. 3. Western philosophy versus Eastern philosophy. 4. Philosophical reflections. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to distinguish a holistic perspective from a partial point of view, recognize human activities that emanate from deliberate reflection, realize the value of doing philosophy and obtaining a broad perspective on life, do a philosophical reflection on a concrete situation from a holistic perspective, and appreciate indigenous thoughts. Before we start with our lesson proper, watch the following video so that you can be able to understand why is it important to know ourselves so that we can be successful with our course of understanding the philosophy of the human person.
There's a beautiful Indian story about a musk deer with a really powerful lesson. Now you may have already heard of musk, maybe because it exists in your perfumes or your aftershaves or deodorants as a scent. And this scent is one of the most expensive natural products in the world, fetching 3 times its weight in gold. Now when this deer comes across this aroma, this scent, it becomes completely captivated. It searches through the forest day and night for the source of this scent. Completely intoxicated by this incredible fragrance, the deer searches in every corner, in every place to find where it's coming from. The deer completely exhausts itself looking for the source, with the bitter irony and not recognizing that the fragrance comes from inside its own body. The fragrance musk is produced in a gland in the deer's body. The deer spends its whole life searching for outside what was always hidden inside. I heard this example when I lived as a monk to describe the human condition of life. How we spend our whole lives looking for pleasures and happiness outside of us, when actually what we're searching for is right there inside of us. We try to find joy and happiness in external pleasures, in things, in results, when actually real happiness comes from meaning, relationships, and a connection with oneself. See, we all know that we can't love someone we don't know. So how can you love yourself when you don't know yourself? And just as this musk deer, we've probably had similar experiences. How many times have you walked out of your home and then felt that you've forgotten one of those top 3 things? Usually your keys, your wallet or purse, or your phone. You rush back in, you look around your own home, you make a mess, you make havoc, you look under every seat, every corner, and then realize that that phone, that wallet or purse, or those keys were in your back pocket. In the process of seeking happiness externally, we make a complete mess of our minds and life, and sometimes even the lives of others, not realizing that what we were truly looking for has always been with us. Today we hear a lot about self-love and self-care, but neither of these are possible without self-knowledge, without self-realization, without self-awareness. Remember, if we don't know ourselves, we can't love ourselves.
John, what would you like to be when you grow up?
Mom, I want to be happy.
John, you don't understand my question.
Mom, you do not understand what life is all about.
Based on the conversation, do you think that John answered his teacher's question correctly? What do you think was John's interpretation of his teacher's question? Based on his responses, what kind of student do you imagine John to be? If you were John's teacher, how would you respond to him? How is philosophy related to this situation? Look closely at the image. What can you say about the picture? What do you think is the message conveyed? You see, everybody knows the story about Juan Tamad. It is just a question of, if not now, then when? What can you say about this next picture? Yes, most probably we are on the same thinking, that people who put 100% of their efforts in learning know more compared to those people who just put a little of their efforts. The rationale for revising the general education curriculum for Philippine higher and basic education stems from a viewpoint that adheres to a more holistic and less disciplinal program where the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 or Republic Act 10533 curriculum hinges on. It is thus crucial that this subject underpins a philosophical quest more generally. One of the key elements in many educational reforms is diversity, difference, and choice, or other proposals that establish separate curricular routes for different groups or individuals. Diversity is the difference that makes each person unique. For example, biology, ethnicity and culture, family life, beliefs, geography, experiences, and religion. Sometimes, we have difficulty in accepting others because they are different from us. Yet, such behavior can limit a person's opportunities or can make the person feel excluded or aggrieved. Educational challenge in the 21st century entails how to deal appropriately with cultural and racial multiplicity and that one does not engage in harassment of any form. What then is the meaning of philosophy? Etymologically, the word philosophy comes from two Greek words philo, meaning to love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. Philosophy originally meant love of wisdom, and in a broad sense, wisdom is still the goal of philosophy. Its real definition states that philosophy is the science that by natural light of reason studies the first causes or highest principle of all things. With this definition, four things are to be considered: science, natural light of reason, study of all things, and first cause or highest principle. Philosophy is called science because the investigation is systematic. It follows certain steps and it employs certain procedures. In other words, it is an organized body of knowledge just like any other sciences. Philosophy investigates things not by using any other laboratory instrument or investigative tools, neither on the basis of supernatural revelation, otherwise it becomes theology. Instead, the philosopher uses his natural capacity to think, or simply human reason alone, or the so-called unaided reason. Philosophy studies all things. This sets the distinction between philosophy from other sciences. All other sciences concern themselves with a particular object of investigation. For example, anthropologists study human beings in relation with the society. Sociologists study society, its form, structures, and functions. Botanists focus their attention to plants. Linguists limit themselves with language. theologians investigate God, whereas a philosopher studies human beings, society, religion, language, God, and plants, among other concerns. The reason is that philosophy is not one-dimensional or partial. In short, a philosopher does not limit himself to a particular object of inquiry. He questions almost anything, if not everything. It is a multidimensional or holistic. Philosophy studies the first cause or highest principle of all things. The four principles are principle of identity, principle of non-contradiction, principle of excluded middle, and principle of sufficient reason. Principle of identity. Whatever is, and whatever is not, is not. Everything is what it is. Everything is its own being, and not being is not being. For example, a chair. It is a piece of wood made for sitting. It is designed to be used to sit on and not to be used for anything else. Principle of non-contradiction. It is impossible for a thing to be and not to be at the same time and at the same respect. For example, it is impossible that you are alive and dead at the same time. It's either you are alive or you are dead. Principle of excluded middle. A thing is either is or is not. Everything must either be or not be. Between being and not being, there is no middle ground possible. For example, a color is either black or white. There are no gray colors. Another example, it's either a yes or a no. There are no maybes. Principle of sufficient reason. This states that nothing exists without a sufficient reason for its being and existence. For example, you are alive for a reason. The birds are there for a reason. This pandemic has a reason why this happened. If up until now, you are still questioning the reason or your purpose of existence, then watch the next video after this slide.
So many people say they can't find their life purpose. They don't know why they are here on this earth. I think the first problem is most people think that their life purpose is something they need to find, like a needle in a haystack, or a mathematical problem you can solve to figure out what your life is all about. Your purpose is not hiding behind a bush. Your purpose is not hiding. It's not a problem to solve. It is waiting for you to become more present and more conscious. I want to tell you, everyone has purpose on this earth. But your purpose is not coming to you through your thoughts. You cannot think it into existence. Don't overthink it. Your purpose can't be found using brain power or solving a mathematical equation. Your purpose is not going to come to you through your brain. It can only come through your heart, your intuition. And for that to happen, you need to be present. You need to live in the present moment. Give your fullest attention, your best effort to each present moment. Giving your full attention and very best action in each moment will lead to each next best moment. It will lead to expansion and growth in your life, which will ultimately lead you to many things you love doing. And soon you will understand what your purpose really is. But don't rush it. Don't stress over it. No purpose is coming through stress. No purpose is rushing through because you're anxious. Do your thing and do it to the best of your ability in every moment, no matter what it is. If it's taking out the trash, that's your purpose right now. Do it better than anyone and be present. If it's helping 1 million people change their lives, do it, but do it with presence. Everyone is different. Your main purpose might be to be a great parent. Maybe your grand life purpose is to help those less fortunate, to stand up for injustice that matters to you. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you know it's right for you. When you discover that thing which you must do, it will take on a life of its own. You will discover yourself to be greater than anything you ever expected of yourself. If you're continually searching for it, you're missing out on living. And when you miss out on living in this moment, you miss out on creating your best moments, which lead to that purpose. You might say that you have a purpose and a why. Your purpose might be to help others out of depression. Your why might be because you have been there yourself or lost someone you love to depression. Your purpose might be to give your children love and presence. Your why might be because you didn't receive it yourself, because you know the opposite and don't want that for anyone. Your purpose and your why might have nothing to do with each other. Your why might be your family, your legacy, something that has nothing to do with the work you do. Why is it a must for you? What is the reason? If your purpose is meaningful and your why is strong, nothing will stop you. Find that purpose. Get quiet and understand why you must.
In attaining wisdom, there is a need for emptying. Emptying can be intellectual. For instance, the Taoist considers an empty cup more useful than a full one. This means simplicity and humility. Emptying can also be spiritual. For Christian philosophy, poverty in spirit means compassion. Emptying is also physical. The Buddhists refrain from misuse of senses, thereby emphasizing a unified whole. Without the virtue of emptying, students will only learn partial philosophy that is knowledge-based without becoming holistic. For example, acquiring wisdom through various dimensions of being human, including the psychological, social, emotional, and moral aspects. Having said all of that, one might ask, why is philosophy important? Let me answer you straight. Philosophy is important because 1. Ideas matter. The ideas one believes largely determine the kind of person one becomes. 2. We all have a worldview, what we believe about the world and our place in it. Philosophy, when rightly done, can give us a better worldview. 3. Philosophy examines assumptions, asks questions, seeks to clarify and analyze concepts, and seeks to organize fact into a rational system, not just one, but for all disciplines. 4. Philosophy gives us a clearer understanding of life and what is important in life by teaching us to examine our core beliefs and ideas. And lastly, philosophy makes us more human. Socrates said, "An unexamined life is not worth living," which meant that being able to examine our lives, to analyze and think critically, is necessarily at the core of what it means to be human. For a more comprehensive explanation on the meaning of philosophy, please watch the next video.
Crash Course Philosophy is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace, share your passion with the world.
I'm Hank Green, and you and I are about to embark on a journey of inquiry into the whole world, your world, in an effort to figure out what gives it meaning, what makes it beautiful, where its evils come from, and ultimately what is the very nature of reality itself. Along the way, we're going to question every aspect of your own personal life. Why do you do what you do? Why do you think what you think? Why do you feel what you feel? Now, if you've joined me on Crash Course before, you might say, we've already learned all that stuff, like in psychology and biology biology and anatomy and physiology. And it's true, science can definitely help us understand our thoughts and feelings and actions. But on this particular journey, we're going to be exploring aspects of the human condition that can't be explained only by hormones or neurotransmitters, by personal experiences or hereditary conditions. Because all of those chemicals and experiences that make us who we are can actually raise as many questions as they answer. Like, if all of my decisions really are just the result of how I was raised and what chemicals I have flowing through my brain, then are any of my choices actually free? And if I'm not truly free to make my own decisions or choose my own actions, then how can I be held accountable for them? Yeah, it's gonna be that kind of journey. Rather than just looking at the world and describing what we see, we'll be evaluating it. We will take nothing as given, set our assumptions aside, or at least try really hard to, and do our best to see the world as if we've never seen it before. And for what it's worth, we'll also be talking about Batman and what Dick Grayson can teach us about the concept of identity. And we'll learn how The Matrix can help us understand the life and writing of René Descartes. Also, we'll try to answer unanswerable questions and puzzle over paradoxes that have plagued geniuses for thousands of years. It's gonna be hard and enlightening and frustrating, and if I do my job properly, it'll stick with you long after you and I have parted ways, because we are going to do philosophy. These days, people use the word philosophy to describe some opinion they might have or an approach they have to a certain topic. Like, you might have a philosophy when it comes to golf, though I personally do not. But we are going to use this word more narrowly to describe a way of approaching the world that traces its roots back to ancient Greece, 500 years before the Common Era. This was a time of great intellectual movement around the world. Buddhism and Jainism were developing in Asia at the same time philosophical thought was emerging in Greece. There, scholars were tangled up in a distinction they were just beginning to make between philos and mythos, or what we'd now roughly call science and storytelling. At that time, there were bards like Homer who were trying to understand and explain the world through stories, while the earliest philosophers were using methods that were more analytical and scientific, although they didn't really have the concept of science back then. So philosophia, literally the love of wisdom, was a new way of trying to make sense of the world. When the earliest philosophers used the word philosophy, they basically meant the academic study of anything, which, like, I guess could include golf. But at what we might call the first universities in the Western world, Plato's Academy and its rival Aristotle's Lyceum, math, biology, physics, poetry, political science, and astronomy were all considered to be philosophy. Eventually, scholars began thinking of these fields differently, as separate disciplines. Studies that had strong empirical elements came to be considered science, a search for answers. But philosophy came to be understood more as a way of thinking about questions. Big questions. And today, 2,500 years after the ancient Greeks first brought them up, philosophers still love asking questions, oftentimes the same questions, and they don't mind that they never get an answer. So, what are these big questions that have managed to intrigue and stump philosophers for so long? One of the first might best be phrased as, what is the world like? Sounds simple enough to answer, right? Like, just look around and see all the stuff, well, this is what the world is like. But the philosophical approach isn't just based on observation. It has other, much more complex questions packed inside it. When a philosopher wonders what the world is like, she might really be asking, what's the nature of reality? Like, is the world just made up of matter and energy, or is there something else going on? And if it is just matter and energy, then where did it all come from? Is there a god? And if so, then what is he or she or it like? And for that matter, when you're asking about the world, can you also be asking about the nature of yourself as a citizen of the world? So, what kind of being am I? Do I have a soul? Is there something immaterial about me that will survive after I die? All of these questions are ways of exploring what philosophers call metaphysics, one of the three main branches of philosophy, an effort to understand the fundamental nature of the world, of the universe, and of being. Now, if those questions aren't heady enough for you, we, as students of philosophy, also have a whole separate set of questions that are about how we know the answers to any of this stuff. This particular strain of philosophy, which is like knowing about knowing, is epistemology, literally the study of knowledge, the second major field of philosophy. And it poses questions like, is the world really what I think it is? Like, really, is everything I see and think and experience, is it actually true? If it isn't, then what is true? And what's the best way to go about figuring out the truth? Is science the best way, or are there more ethereal paths to truth? Paths that science can never really travel. And let's say that after a lot of searching and question asking, I begin to develop some ideas, like an inkling about what might be true. Then, how do I know if I'm right? How will I ever know I'm wrong? Can I ever be certain about anything? Now, at this point, I wouldn't blame you if you're thinking, am I real? Do I Do I know anything? Well, as questions go, these might not seem super practical, but there's another area of philosophy that helps frame your thinking around what you actually do, like how you should act and what you should attach meaning to. It's called value theory, and it's usually divided into two main branches. The first is ethics. You've heard of it. It's the thing that politicians are always said to lack and Jedi are supposed to have in great supply, though don't get me started on the prequels. In philosophy, though, ethics isn't just a code of what's right and what's wrong. It's the study of how humans should live with each other. Rather than just sitting around and judging people, ethics involves posing questions like, how should I live? Is there any reason that I should treat, say, strangers differently than the people I love? And for that matter, do I owe anything to myself? What about animals or the earth? And if I do have any of these obligations at all, where do they come from? Who says? Ultimately, whatever system you use to decide what's good or evil as human behavior goes is determined by your values. That's why ethics is considered part of value theory. But the other part of value theory isn't about what's right. It's about what's beautiful. Aesthetics is the study of beauty and art. Now, the concept of beauty is talked about practically everywhere, from the media to art school to barber college. But for philosophers, the pursuit of aesthetics involves considering what beauty is and whether it even exists. Aesthetics is a part of value theory because beauty and art are things we value and evaluate. And many people who study this particular kind of philosophy, known as aestheticians, believe there is such a thing as the beautiful. Something that doesn't just depend on what you happen to find attractive, but something that's just objectively true. And finally, there's one more aspect of philosophy that I should mention because it doesn't ask questions so much as help us find answers. Yes, finally, some answers. And that thing, which I happen to think can be beautiful in its own way, is logic. Logic is the philosopher's toolbox. It contains the saws and hammers, the microscopes and beakers that philosophers use to go about answering their questions in a clear, systematic way. Logic is about reasoning, giving strong arguments that don't fall victim to fallacies, which are, as you will learn, the mortal enemies of philosophical precision. Okay, so metaphysics, epistemology, value theory, they might all seem pretty airy and abstract, but don't worry because you have already done philosophy, even though you might not realize it. You do it in almost every aspect of your life. Every time you argue with your parents or wonder if you should date someone or decide to eat a salad instead of a ham and cheese Hot Pocket, you are doing philosophy. Because you're thinking about the world and your place in it. You're figuring out what you value, why you value it, and what you should do about it. So here's our plan. We're gonna learn about the major fields of philosophy, posing questions and considering possible answers along the way, and each time we will use a two-step method. First, we'll really try to understand. You're not gonna agree with all the ideas that I present to you, and I won't agree with them either. That's not the point. The point in step one is to really try to get inside of an idea, to understand it as charitably as possible. Then, in step two, you'll subject your understanding to some serious critical evaluation. Basically, you'll try to knock down what you think you know about a particular view of the world. And you'll do this whether you agree with the view or not. Why? Because only when you challenge your understanding of how some people view the world can you decide for yourself if theirs is a view worth having. Which leads me to my final point. Philosophy is not your usual field of study. I'm not going to be teaching you a body of knowledge where success means you know a bunch of stuff. Success in this course will mean that you know how to think. All we have are questions, and all you have is a brain. And the goal of philosophy is for you to use your brain to come up with the answers that make the most sense to you. You'll learn how to formulate arguments to support your ideas so you can explain why you think you're right, which, if you've ever been on the internet, you know is something that not a lot of people are good at. In order to do that, you're gonna need to understand philosophical reasoning, the tools we use to investigate life's most perplexing questions, and that is where we're gonna be headed the next time we meet. For now, you've learned about the historical origins of philosophy in ancient Greece and its three main divisions: metaphysics, epistemology, and value theory. We also talked about logic and how you're going to use it to understand and critically evaluate a whole host of different worldviews. Not about golf. This episode of Crash Course Philosophy is made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is a way to create a website, blog, or online store for you and your ideas. Squarespace features a user-friendly interface, custom templates, and 24/7 customer support. Try Squarespace at squarespace.com/crashcourse for a special offer. Crash Course Philosophy is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out some amazing shows like The Good Stuff, PBS Spacetime, and Physics Girl. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio with the help of these amazing people, and our graphics team is Thought Cafe.